I want to offer a warm welcome for the first time on the A Minute to Midnight show, George Farkas. And you are in Sweden, I believe, at the moment. And I don't think I've ever interviewed anyone that's in Sweden before. So it's nice to be talking to you today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, it's beautiful here in Sweden.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be a totally different time of year than what we've got here because it's winter, but you should be hopefully enjoying a good summer.
We are.
Excellent. Now, your daughter, Rachel, who's in Canada, she actually sent me a copy of a book that you've written, and it arrived today, which was great timing in the mail. And so I actually started reading it, and I'm probably about a quarter of the way through it and thoroughly enjoying it, I got to say. So it's really nice to be talking to you, and that will be the main subject of our conversation.
Great.
So the book is titled, If God Gave Me a Voice, What I'd Tell the World. So what's the message that you want to tell the world?
Well, my wife, Julie, and I were just two ordinary people, but we lived extraordinary lives, and that is because of what God did. And this is available, this life, for anybody who wants it. Jesus said, in this world, you're going to have trouble, and everyone can understand that. There's trials and tribulation in this world. But Jesus says, take heart, he's overcome the world. Not everyone overcomes the world. So the question is, well, how do you overcome the world? Well, John tells us that everyone born of God overcomes the world. So the only way to overcome the world is to come to know Christ. And in my opinion, what that really means is we grow up with a world view. We're taught the world's philosophy. And when Christ comes into your life, the Holy Spirit starts to renew your mind to truth. So you end up with a biblical viewpoint. And this is why atheists, a lot of times they'll mock Christians, and they'll say, when we put our children to bed, we read them fairy tales like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But when you guys put your kids to bed, you read from the Bible, their fairy tales, like Jonah in the belly of the fish. And the reason they believe this is the Bible says there's a veil over their hearts, and only in Christ is that veil taken away. Paul goes on and says in Corinthians, the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God because he considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they're only discerned through the Spirit. So in other words, people that don't know God are going to think these stories are fairy tales. But once the Spirit of God comes into your heart, you're not going to have a problem with Jonah being in the belly of the fish for 3 days, or Jesus being born of a virgin, or Jesus rising from the dead. So anybody that wants to find out if God is real, there's a simple way to do that. I call it the 3 R's. All you have to do is repent of your sins, receive Christ's forgiveness, and be ruled by Christ, or be dependent upon him. And if you draw near to God, the Bible says that God will draw near to you. And the more you trust him, the more he's going to reveal himself through these little miracles. And that's what our book is all about the little miracles that God has done in our lives for two ordinary people, helped us overcome all our trials that we've been through. And through that, he's encouraged us to move forward. The biggest trial I've had happened 3 years ago when Julia passed away. And if I didn't know Christ, I'm sure I would have turned to drugs or alcohol, and there wouldn't be any reason to continue living. And that happens to a lot of people that lose their spouse. But when you know God, Psalm 23 says he restores your soul. And that's what he did for me. He gave me a purpose to go on, encouraged me to go forward. And the neat thing about God, what he's done in our lives, is he's always seemed to confirm these truths. My wife wrote about 150 Christian songs, and a lot of times when I'm lonely, I'll listen to them. And one song she wrote was called Storm the Wall. And one lyric says, don't look back, you're forward bound. And that really encouraged me, that it was confirmation that God was using her words to tell me, don't look back at the good times you had with Julie. You'll have that in heaven. I'll be reunited. But look forward. God has a purpose for me with this extra time that he's given me. And so that's what I've focused on.
Now, it's interesting because when you look at the front cover of the book, which I've actually got sitting in front of me, the paperback copy of it, it is written, or the title of it being written by Streeter and Tang rather than your name. Do you want to tell our listeners why?
Well, those were our nicknames, our musical nicknames. I had an uncle in Croatian, you call Uncle Streets, and I liked him. So I thought I'll use the nickname Streeter for me, for our music. And my wife, when I first met her, she'd come over to my house, and my mother would always ask her what she'd like to drink. And she would always say, oh, I like your Tang orange juice. Could you make me some of that? So that's how we came up with that name.
Oh, man. Do I remember that drink when I was a kid? We had an advert here. It was start every day with a Tang. That's going back a long way. Yeah, so, right, now, you had small miracles and, firstly, it would be nice if you could tell them how long you were married for, and then describe some of the small miracles in your lives after becoming a Christian. After becoming Christians, I should say.
We were married for 42 years, and Julie was my best friend. I mean, we did everything together. I loved music, and she was really a creative person. She wasn't that crazy about music, but she loved me so much that whatever I was interested, she was interested in. And so that's why we got along so well. I tried to meet her needs, what she was interested in, and she always met my needs. So we had a great relationship. After we became Christians, we were both 33 years old. We had a recording studio. We did jingles, and we played in bands. We're really into the world. And when I was teaching for the separate school board, the Catholic school board in Ontario, and I guess after I became a Christian, I was pretty outgoing with my faith, and I'm quite an introvert. And so one day after school, our superintendent came to visit me, and he asked me an odd question. He said, do you like your job? And I didn't quite understand where he was going with this. And then he said, I heard you having struggles with your faith. And then I realized, my Catholic faith. And I told him, well, actually, Julie and I have signed up for a 6-month course at the Catholic Information Center, and we're going to be studying the Old Testament and the New Testament. So that made him happy, and he left. Now, that was true, but the reason why we signed up, we weren't sure who was telling us the truth. The couple that had a big influence on our salvation, they were saying that the Bible is the authority, and the Catholic Church was saying it's their tradition. And when we asked our priest, he just said, stay away from those people. They're trying to steal your faith. So we figured we'll have to sign up for the course and find out for ourselves who's right. And after a couple of months, we realized that we wanted to make the Bible our authority. And so we knew I'd have to resign, and we decided we were going to move. And so we took a day at Mackinac Island to fast and see what God would say about that. And he gave us Psalm 139, which says, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Now, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario is in the middle of the country, and where we wanted to move to, British Columbia, it's on the west coast. So we took that God was saying, you can move to British Columbia, and even there, I'll guide you. So it's no big thing with God. So we were all excited. And the next day, Julie was actually getting baptized in Lake Superior. And we wanted to tell all our church friends what God was showing us. And we're really shocked when we didn't get a positive feedback. Most of the people were saying, we're immature, you're quitting your job, you don't have another job to go to, you have 3 children and no home to go to, and you're baby Christians, you need to mature before you do something like that. And then an elderly lady stood up, Jean Helberg, and she said God had put this passage of scripture on her heart for Julie's baptism. And you guessed it, what she read was Psalm 139. And there's 1,189 chapters in the Bible. Now, God gives us one of those chapters. The next day, we get the same chapter. So the chances are, one out of 189, that would happen. So God did this throughout our lifetime, that he would confirm things like this. And that really encouraged us to move on. So we had no problem, even though the church didn't support us, that we were going to move to British Columbia. So prior to putting up our house for sale, we had befriended a young couple at church, Eric and Shirley Lorla, and they had a little girl same age as Rachel, our youngest daughter. And we visited their place one winter night, and it was really a dilapidated place and cold, and we thought this isn't good for their child to live here. So we prayed about it, and we told them that we would actually give them a down payment as a gift if they wanted to buy a starter home. So we put our house up for sale after that, and I resigned from my job, and we thought within a month we'll sell our house because we had a beautiful new home. And unfortunately, the steel plant, which is the biggest industry in Sault Ste. Marie, went on strike the next week. And for the next year, nothing in real estate moved. And it came to the point, because I had resigned, I had no income, so I had to take out my 13 years of teacher's pension to survive. And after the year, we were down to about $4,000. And all of a sudden, Eric comes to see us and says they found a beautiful starter home with only a $3,000 down payment. And so we had the dilemma: do we tell Eric we can't give him the money, or do we give him the $3,000? We only have $4,000 left. And so we prayed about it, and we felt God wanted our yes to be yes. And so we gave them the money. They bought their nice little home. And about a month later, God sold our house for the price that we originally put on it the year before. And we were going to be getting the money September 1st. We're going to move to British Columbia. It was the end of August. We only had maybe $400 left. And Julie was asked to sing at a little chapel just outside Sault Ste. Marie. And that was her ministry. And so we went out there, and they were going to pass the offering plate around. So I dug into my pockets, and I noticed all I had was a $2 bill and a $20 bill. And I'm fearful we're not going to have enough money to make it to the end of the month. So I nudged Julie and I pointed to the $2, and she gave me a sad look, like disappointed look at me, and pointed to the $20. And I didn't have time to argue with her because the collection plate came to me. So I put in the 20 reluctantly. And at the end of the service, the pastor stands up and tells the congregation that Julie and George are moving to British Columbia, and to help them out, we're going to give them all the proceeds from the collection plate today. And that just humbled me.
Wow.
You can't outgive God. And the funny part was, I had taught my daughter Luke 6:38 that says, for the measure you use, it will be measured you. So it was a good lesson for me to learn.
Well, yeah, that's pretty amazing. By the way, just mentioning the battle you had about whether to be in the Catholic Church or out of it. Of course, I had the same battle when I first became a Christian, having grown up a Catholic, and there came a point where I knew I had to get out as well at the time. So yeah, I can relate to that. Now, what events, extraordinary events, took place then when you moved to British Columbia?
Well, God sure was with us. The second day there in BC, my brother-in-law was working at the Hammond Mill, and he said, "Hey, George, there's 6 openings. Go apply right away." And he said, "Well, there's hundreds of applications, but there's still a chance." So I put in my resume, and I did get an interview. And the man that interviewed me, Robbie Graham, he looks at my resume and he sees all these Christian references. And he just looks up and says to me, "I don't like Christians. I've hired a few of them, and all they want to do is preach their religion. They don't want to listen to orders." And so I thought, wow, I guess I don't get this job. So that evening, my mother-in-law comes over to our house and tells us that she got a phone call from Carol Pelzer, who's the pastor's wife. Julie and I came for a visit the year previous, and she was asked to sing at their little chapel. And they knew we're moving to British Columbia, so they were asking my mother-in-law if we arrived yet. So my mother-in-law told her that I had gone for this job at the Hammond Mill, and the man interviewing me didn't like Christians, so I guess George didn't get the job. So the next morning, the phone rings, and I'm told I got the job. And later on, I found out the amazing story behind that. Carol's husband, Jim, who was the pastor of this little chapel, also worked full-time at the Hammond Mill, and he was the general foreman there. So the next morning, he went in to talk to Robbie, and he said, "Hey, Robbie, how come you're giving my buddy George such a hard time for being a Christian?" And he backed down and he said, "Oh, well, actually, he's one of the 6 people we're hiring." So I actually think I got the job because I was a Christian, because of Jim. There's 2 other neat stories that happened that first year at the mill. Julie was asked to sing in Abbotsford for about 3,000 people at a conference. And I always used to attend with her, but it was going to be on a Friday evening, and I had an afternoon shift at work at the Hammond Mill from 4 to 12. So I told her, I'll just change with somebody so I can be with you to support you. And so I went and started asking people at work, and then I realized Friday evening, nobody wants to work Friday evening. At 4 o'clock, when they finished the morning shift, they would walk across the street to the bar, and they would stay there all night till it closed. So I realized, wow, this is going to be difficult to get anybody to work for me. So I thought, okay, I'm going to offer $20, see if somebody will change shift for $20. So there was this young man that I asked, and he said, sure, he would change shifts, but he didn't want my money. So I thought, wow, that's really neat. And so Friday morning, I worked his shift, and beside me was a young man named Ed Schindel. And the first question he asked me as we're working, he goes, are you a Christian? I said, yeah, are you? And he said, no, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. And we spent the next 8 hours of the shift talking about, is Jesus a God or is Jesus the God? Yeah. And he was really interested in my answers. So at the end of the shift, I said to him, would you like to come to my house tomorrow morning and maybe do some more studying? And he agreed. So that night, Julie sang beautifully as always, but nothing special. I thought maybe something special would happen. That's why God wanted me to change shifts. But it was the next morning when Ed came over, I asked him if he wanted to become a Christian, and he said yes. And he was a very passionate Christian after that. So that was something really special that God did in my life. And one other incident happened in the lunchroom. I should mention, Ed said he knew I was a Christian because I would be reading my Bible in the lunchroom. So that's how he knew it. My wife would always make me these beautiful meals like steak or pork chops with corn, mashed potatoes, and all the other guys, they would just have cold sandwiches with a thermos of coffee. And this one night I microwaved the spaghetti that Julie made me. And June, who was an elderly lady, came up to me and she goes, boy, that sure smells good. So that night I told Julie what happened. And she said, well, next time I make spaghetti, I'll make an extra plate for June. And so the next time I had spaghetti, I gave a plate to June, and she was so thrilled she wanted to pay me for it. And I said, no, Julie said she doesn't want any money, but anytime she makes me it, she'll make you an extra plate. So June was just loving it every time I had spaghetti. So after I resigned from the mill, about a year or two after that, I'm driving my car downtown and I stop at a stop sign, and this lady starts running to my door. And here I realize it's June. And she goes, George, I got to tell you something. I've become a Christian. And I didn't even realize that she knew I was a Christian because I never shared anything with her. She must have saw me reading the Bible, I guess. And I just thought, wow, isn't that neat that God let me know that through my wife's spaghetti, that had been the door into her heart. So that's pretty neat how God works these things.
Absolutely, yeah. So you were at the mill and then I guess you left at some point. So why did you leave?
Well, it was kind of legalistic, the school, and it wasn't what I thought it would be. Actually, I found that the Catholic school was much more loving. And so I turned to be a Christian counselor. I met a good friend from church, Gordon Hardy, who was a counselor, and he needed help. So I signed up for a year program with burden bearers to become a Christian counselor. And then I worked a year with Gordon. But after the year, our finances weren't that great, and so he had to let me go. So that led me to about 4 years of semi-unemployment. But through that time, God was really gracious. He did many miracles. First one came from a lady called Karen Gilmore. We had met Karen the first week we attended church in Maple Ridge, and she was kind of a loner. She was in a car accident and had to use a cane, and her speech was slurred because of the accident. And she was trying to get disability from the government, but at that point, they hadn't given her it. So we befriended her, and we used to take her out for lunch after church each week and treat her to a meal. And she became a good friend. She'd come over quite often during the week and talk to Julie and that. And so this one week, Julie's sick, and so I go to church alone, and Karen comes up to me and gives me a card. And so when I got home, I opened the card in front of Julie, and I said, oh, Karen gave us a card. And we thought it was just to encourage us because we're struggling. I was looking for a job. And inside was a check for $3,000.
Wow.
And it blew us away because we thought Karen was really poor. And in the note, it says that her and her mother own quite a bit of property. And this is the interest that they get every year. And they always give it to whoever God puts on their heart. And so isn't that neat?
Yeah.
God, we give $3,000 to Eric and Shirley as a gift. God gives us back $3,000 through Karen. So God keeps on confirming these things to us. And then Julie met a Christian lady, Cheryl Howard, her and her husband were in the 1984 Montreal Olympics. She was a high school teacher, and they got involved with a homeschool program. And they decided that they would start their own because the company that had this program with the Japanese exchange students were using Christian churches, the people to take in these students for a month or 2 months free, and so Julie and Cheryl figured we could do the same thing, only we'll pay anybody who takes these students in, so that the mothers can make some money. So it was quite successful. Cheryl had some contacts in Japan, and so that helped us through most of those 4 years. I had quite a few part-time jobs that were given me from friends in church who were trying to be nice to me and help me out. Like, there's two really funny stories. There was a builder at our church, and I said, well, I'm no good at carpentry or anything like that. He goes, well, you can just pick up the wood and that, clean up. I'll hire you. But this one day he was behind and he needed my help. So he said, can you cut these pieces of wood 16 inches long? I need about 20 of them. So I got the power handsaw and I marked them and cut them all. And when he went to put one up, he goes, it's just a little bit short. And he tried the next one, and they're all the same. And I didn't realize, because I was a teacher all my life, I didn't do that stuff, that you have to, the blade is 1/8 of an inch. So when you cut on the line, you have to cut on the outside. So I really set him back. I was really embarrassed, but he was really gracious about it. But that was really hard for me. And then another time, a good friend of mine, Bruce McDonald, he owned a scrapyard, and his partner was a Jewish man. And one morning when I'm working there, he comes out with his Bible and he shoves it to me and says, go talk to Jimmy about the gospel. And I'm thinking, well, he's my boss. If he wants me to do that, I'll go ahead and do it. So I'm sitting down talking to Jimmy about the Bible. And Danny drives in to work in his truck, and he sees me sitting down talking to Jimmy with a Bible. So he comes over to me and he says, what are you doing? Why aren't you working? And I didn't know what to say because I didn't want to get Bruce into trouble, but I didn't know what to say. So I said, Bruce told me to share the Bible with you. So he stormed into the office to talk to Bruce, and I didn't get fired, but I think Bruce got an earful that day. So that was a neat story. Near the end of those 4 years, our finances were really poor, and Julie one morning said, our children need dental work. You're going to have to go to welfare. Like, God hasn't provided this time, and they're going to need that. So I reluctantly went to welfare to see if they'd help us out, and they told me, I need to bring my wife before they can make a decision. So when I came home, Julie knew I had applied for a substitute teaching position a couple of weeks earlier, and I told her it went well, the interview. So she had phoned the school board to find out if I was given the job. She thought that would really encourage me if they had said yes. And unfortunately, they said no, I wasn't given the position, that I didn't know anything about the year 2000, their new program. And if I wanted to substitute teach, I could volunteer for a couple of years, and then maybe then they'd put me on the list. So that was a terrible blow to my ego. Here, I've taught 13 years in Ontario. I was well respected as an outdoor education teacher, and now I'm not even worthy enough for a substitute job.
Yeah. So what year roughly would that have been?
That would be, let's see, 1986 or so, around there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep.
87. And so Cheryl comes over, Cheryl Howard, the Olympian, and prays with us. We told her the bad day we're having. And about 2 hours later, she comes back. She was visiting a friend, and the friend gave her an envelope to give to me. So I opened it up, and there's a check for $500 in there. And from a stranger, I don't know the man. And Cheryl is more shocked than I am. She goes, I can't believe it. This man has 12 children. He lives on a farm, and he's hurt his leg, and he's off work, and they don't have any money. And he's giving you $500. So that was another confirmation of God that I don't need to go to welfare. I don't need the world to meet my needs, that God will meet my needs. And a little while after that, an opportunity to teach at a high school came up. It was a special program called CREW. It was for at-risk students. And it was like tailor-made for me because the requirements were you had to have a BC teaching certificate, you had to have mill experience, and you had to have counseling experience. The mill experience because the students worked 1 day a week at the Cedar Ridge Cap Mill, and I would have to supervise them. And counseling experience because these kids were pretty volatile, some of them. And so they had tried for 6 weeks to get a teacher. No one had the qualifications. So because it's pretty hard to get someone, a blue-collar worker and a white-collar worker, someone with mill experience and counseling experience. You don't usually find that. So I really felt good about that I went for the interview, and they really liked me. And they said they would give me a 5-day course at the mill. And if Jim, the supervisor, thought that I could do the job, then the job was mine. So Dave McDonald, he was the man that was leaving who had started this program. He told me that Friday afternoon he'd come out and let me know either way if I had the job or didn't have the job. And he would tell the principal who was hiring to hire me or whatever. So Friday morning, Jim asked me to use the forklift and take out all the bundles of the ridge caps. And the forklift doesn't work properly, so he quickly showed me how to sort of make it work. And when I started to drive it, I couldn't stop it, and I almost ran into the side of the building. And he was really upset with me. So he said, "Get off it, I'll do it." And when Dave came to talk to him about me, I could see him. He was raising his hands up in the air and I guess swearing and that, and just saying, "This guy is useless, don't hire him." And Dave promised that he would tell me. Well, he just turned around and walked away. He never came and told me anything. So I knew that I had lost the job. So when I got home, Julie was at the door and she runs out. She was so excited. She had baked me a cake. We were going to have a big celebration. 4 years of unemployment. Now all our financial needs are going to be met. I've got a good teaching job. And she saw me start to cry and she said, "What's wrong?" And I told her I had lost the job and I had let my family down. That was a very difficult weekend. And so my kids were really great. They gave me all the verses I had taught them to trust God. Sunday morning, we went to church, and our regular pastor, Pastor Ed, was called on an emergency. So Barry, the worship leader, was going to give the sermon. And I didn't really care for Barry. I thought he was more like Donny Osmond, just there to entertain for himself and not really to lead the church in worship. And so when I found out he was going to give the message, I said to Julie, "Oh, I don't want to listen to Barry." And she rebuked me and sort of said, "You know, if God could talk through a donkey, he can talk through Barry." So we stayed there, and Barry's talking about the Israelites being delivered from the Egyptians, and he reads Exodus 14:13 and 14. That reads, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you'll never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And Julie looked at me and I looked at her, and we knew that word was for us. And all we had to do was be still, that God was going to work it out. And I took the part that says, the Egyptians today you'll never see again, would be our financial problems that we struggled with for the last 4 years. God was going to make sure that I had an income to provide for my family. And the next morning at 9 o'clock, the principal calls and says, "George, you got the job." I found out later that Jim did put it in a bad report for me, and Dave told the principal that we should look for someone else. Fortunately for me, the principal was retiring at the end of August, and this was the end of June. And he told Dave, "We looked 6 weeks, we can't find anyone. I'm retiring. I want to get this off my plate. I'm hiring George." So there again, God interceded and gave me the job. One last neat thing that happened after I got the job, Cheryl comes over and says a friend of hers has to sell their horse. It's worth $3,000, and they offered to sell it to Cheryl for $1,000. Now Cheryl teaches horseback riding on the island. That's why the home school ended for us, because she moved to the island. But she had Japanese students there, and there were some that wanted to buy horses, and there weren't any horses available on the island. So she said, if I had $1,000, I could make $2,000 tomorrow. So I told her, well, we've already saved over $1,000 since I started working. I'll give you the $1,000, and we'll just share the profit. So the next day, she sold a horse, and I got $500. So I went to talk to the pastor of the man that gave me the $500, the church he belonged to. And I told him to get $500 worth of vouchers, groceries for this man, and don't tell him where it came from, because I figured that way the only person he could thank would be God. I didn't want him to thank me for giving him back the $500 he gave me. So that was pretty neat how God worked it out, that I owned a horse for a day to make $500 to pay back the man that helped me out.
Yeah, that is a cool story. Now, it reminds me, I saw the name in your book, George Mueller, and I thought, I can relate to that, because you're talking about faith for provision, and that's a guy that immediately springs to my mind, because the last few years with A Minute to Midnight, I basically based the fact that I'm even doing this on having read George Mueller talking about trusting God and so on for your finances, because I had no idea how I was going to survive when I really went doing this too. So, yeah, these are pretty cool stories. Now, I've heard that you were afraid that God would send you to Africa, and, like there was I remember a song, "Please Don't Send Me to Africa." And, yeah, but he did, didn't he?
Yeah, we had become Christians in 1983, and at that time, Melody Green had come to Sault Ste. Marie to give a concert. Her husband, Keith Green, he was a famous Christian musician.
Died in a plane crash, didn't he?
Pardon?
He died in a plane crash, didn't he?
Yes. So Melody was doing the ministry without him, but his message. And that night, she said, Keith said that all of us are called to go to Africa. And I'm a baby Christian, and I'm thinking, oh, Lord, I'll do anything for you. Please don't send me to Africa. I'm not strong enough. The heat will kill me. My diet, I'm such a picky eater. I could never eat that food there. And all those bugs crawling all over the place, I'll die. So I was so fearful that, oh, no, now that I've become a Christian, I'm going to have to go to Africa. And it wasn't until about 23 years later, in 2006, that God started to put the plan into motion. Gordon Hardy, the man I counseled with, had started up a prayer night. It was every Friday night from 8 to midnight that we would pray, and whatever God put on our hearts. So this one evening, there was about 5 of us. Bill mentioned that he had received 2 emails from Uganda from a pastor and a student, and they wanted financial help. So we were going to pray about that, how we could help them. And then Gordon says, oh, that's interesting. I just received a DVD from my nephew. He was commissioned to go to Uganda and make a documentary on the child soldier war there. So he went and looked for the DVD, and he played it for us. It was a 15-minute trailer. And it was pretty brutal of what the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, was doing to the young children, 8 to 14. They were kidnapping them, abducting them, and killing their parents and making them fight in their army. So after watching that, I was appalled, and I wanted to do something for these child soldiers. So I prayed, and nothing much happened for about a year. And then I received an email that said there was going to be a Gulu Walk in Vancouver. And the Gulu Walk was the children that lived in little villages, they would be attacked at nighttime, and so by the LRA. So they would walk every evening to the nearest city, Gulu, where there was a government army there to protect them. So they'd have to walk 2 hours there, and in the morning walk 2 hours back to the little village and go to school in. And they did this every day of their life. The war went on for 20 years. So I was able to sign up on the internet for this walk. It cost $100 to buy a T-shirt to be a team leader, and my daughter and niece wanted to come, so I bought them T-shirts. And then the next question said, "What are your goal to fundraise?" And I'm an introvert, and I don't like asking anybody for money. And I thought, oh no, I can't do this. So I just put down I was going to put down $300 because I figured that's what I spent on the T-shirts. But I was so nervous that when I hit the zero, I hit it a couple extra times, and it read $30,000. And then I thought, well, maybe God is speaking to me. Maybe he's saying if you have big faith, he'll answer that prayer. So I left it at 30,000. And I was able to get a busload of students from our school to walk on a Saturday night. We walked 2 hours, and they raised $4,000 through pledges. And about a month later, I got a letter from the fundraising group saying that they had built a playground for the students with $1 million they received. And I thought, there's something wrong here. $1 million, and all they've done is built a playground. So I was really concerned. So I prayed to God and said, Lord, you have to show me where to send this money, who is worthy of it, who's not going to rip us off. So about a month later, I heard that John MacArthur, he was one of my favorite speakers at that time, was going to be speaking in Burnaby at Willingdon Church. So I went to see him, but I arrived about 15 minutes before it started, and it was filled, the parking lot. I had to park a couple blocks away. When I went inside, all the seats were taken. And I was fortunate, there was at the second row from the front, there was one seat open. I asked the lady, is anyone sitting there? And she said, yes, you are. So I sat down, and John MacArthur hadn't started speaking yet. So she asked me, what's your passion? And I said, well, I'm trying to raise money for the orphans of Uganda. And she elbows her husband next to her and says, John, talk to this man. So they switch seats. And he tells me he just got back from volunteering a month in Uganda at an orphanage run by Irene Gleason, who has 3 of these orphanages in Uganda, and there's 8,000 kids that she feeds, and she gives job skills. And I said, is she the real thing, or is she making money on this? And he goes, oh no, she's the real thing. And a couple of years later, my daughter Rachel was able to spend a week with her, and she confirmed that and said, Dad, she's a godly woman. She's here for the right reasons. So over the 8 years of fundraising at our school, we actually raised over $50,000, not $30,000. And we did dodgeball tournaments, we did walks, we had auctions. There was an interesting thing that happened. 90-year-old grandmother of one of our students called me at school, and she had read in our school newspaper that we're having a dodgeball tournament and wanted to help us out. And I'm thinking, yikes, if she wants to play, she gets hit with the ball, they'll kill her at 90. And then she went on to tell me, no, she's in her apartment most of the time, and all she does is knit these little dolls, and she has about 50 of them that she'd like to donate. Maybe I can make some money on them for the orphans. So my idea was to put them in glass jars with a lid, and the students could put money in, And I would ask the teachers, each classroom, if they raised $33.33 within a month, that they could keep the little, I call them orphan dolls. And so the night before this event was going to take place, I started put the dolls in the jars and the labels on. And at that point, my sister-in-law had come to stay with us. She was living in Ontario, and her husband found out he had cancer, and within a week he died, and she was just devastated. So she had called Julie, we were living in British Columbia, to see if she could stay with us because she was really grieving and didn't want to be alone. So she came to stay with us, and so when she saw me putting dolls in, she asked if she could help, and she asked me what it was all about. And I told her I was trying to raise money for the orphans in Uganda, and I told her about the war. So the next morning I get up, and on the kitchen table there's a check from Elizabeth for the orphans, and it's for $10,000. So that worked out to like over $200 a doll we got for that. So that was pretty neat. And then our home church that I was attending kept on bugging me about Africa, that I needed to go. Like I sent my daughter, she went twice. My son wanted to go, he went once. Why wasn't I going? You know, and I didn't want to tell them the truth that I was afraid to go. And so I just made up an excuse that, if God wants me to go, somebody at school will ask me. And if they ask me to take them to Uganda, then I'll take that as a sign from God that I should go to Africa. So I got them off my back. But about 3 months later, Josh Karras, one of the teachers at my high school, came into my room after school, and he tells me, I want to take my class to Africa. You've been there. Tell me all about it. And I said, well, I haven't been there. I raised money for them, but my daughter's been there twice and my son's been there. So we spent about 45 minutes talking about it. He was all excited. And so he thanked me. And as he was leaving, he turned back and he said, oh, by the way, George, would you come to help me? And my heart just sank. And I said to God in my heart, you fooled me. You tricked me into this. And what made it worse was he got me to apply to the board for permission because I had done other work in that area. And the first day back in September, they gave us permission to take our students to Africa. And then he tells me that the soccer team is going to Mexico in the spring break, and he can't go to Africa. He's got to go to Mexico. So I didn't even want to go to Africa. Now I'm in charge of the whole thing. And I'm an introvert, and I'm thinking no student will even want to go with me. So there was a young teacher that was very charismatic. She wanted to go, but she didn't have the money. So I said, look, I'll pay for your fare back and forth because I need you. So her boyfriend came too. He was a teacher at another school. But when they found out I'd never been to Africa, they didn't want to go. They thought, that's not good if we've never been there. And so I said, well, my daughter Rachel's been there. If she came with us, would you go? And they said, sure, that would be great. So I called my son-in-law, who at the time was working on a movie, Christian movie, Genesis Paradise Lost, and he was really busy. So he didn't mind at all letting his wife go for a couple of weeks to Africa. So that turned out really great. I actually gained weight. It wasn't what I thought it was. And we started a Christian school. We called it Mara Christian School. There was 182 children, poorest of the poor. And the school lasted 4 years. It had 300 students last year, but then it closed down because they lacked financial support. And after I retired, I couldn't help them anymore. But that's my Africa story.
Now, but there's a lot of other stories, obviously, in the book, and so I've read some of them, having started into it, and so on. But how you got saved, and how you and Julie got saved, and so on. And but I want to know, getting to the end because our time's running short. What about when Julia was going through a battle with cancer? You know, how was that? How did God get you through that?
Well, that was really weird because we're living in Sweden because she was a UK member, and she was sick, so we knew we had to go back to Canada for the health reasons. We went to Penticton, and when we got there, first morning she gets up and she says she was reading Isaiah 38 about Hezekiah, where Isaiah tells him that get your house in order, God's going to send you home. And he cries and he prays, and God gives him 15 more years. So Julie reads this, she gets up and she says, George, I got to tell you what I read this morning. And she goes, Hezekiah's story where he's going to be taken home. And she goes, I really think God's speaking to me. But she goes, I read on, and God gave him 15 more years. So she laughs and she says, I'll take the 15 years, Lord. That night, I had to take her to emergency. She was having chest pains, and so they did many tests that night. And when the doctor finally came back, he says, I have bad news. And Julie goes, yeah, I know. I've got blood clots, because she had blood clots before, and her father died from blood clots. And he goes, yes, you have blood clots, but worse than that, you have stage 4 cancer, and there's nothing we can do to help you. So she turned to me. I started to cry, and she said, don't cry. God prepared us for this. So we took that to mean that God was actually going to heal her, that he was going to give her 15 more years. Like he had always confirmed that previously for us. So they told her she had 6 months and 2 weeks to live. I don't know how they got the 2 weeks, but anyways, during that time, she witnessed a lot of people. She really had the joy of the Lord. And I wasn't stressed out at all, because I truly was walking in faith, believing that God was going to do a miracle, and that was going to even allow us a bigger ministry to share God's goodness. And she ended up in the hospice. Usually they're there for 1 or 2 days and they die. Well, she was there for 3 months. And I slept, they had a couch in their room. I slept there with her, was with her constantly. And this one night, I was praying for God to give a sign, something good. Her eyes were all jaundiced, and I figured, well, maybe God take the jaundice away. And every day I would do a journal, a chapter from the Bible, systematically, and I was starting Luke 1 that night. And so I read Luke 1, and I came to verse 37, where it talked about Mary and the angel telling her about she's going to have Jesus. And she says, how do I know this is true? And he told her, no word from God will ever fail. And I took that. I had prayed for some encouragement. I was just hoping that the jaundice would go. And I took that. God was saying that Isaiah 38, that truth, no word from God will fail. Julie will be healed. So it was in the middle of the night. I went over to Julie's bed. She was half asleep. She was on drugs. And I said, Julie, God gave me a word. He's going to heal you. And I looked at her, and she was out of it. She was on the drugs, and I could tell she didn't know what I was saying. But I was rejoicing. I was so excited. 4 days later, Julie passed away. And my faith was shaken. I've never had God not answer. And I didn't know what to do.
Yeah, that'll be
And
tough.
I struggled.
Yeah.
But as Psalm 23 says, that God strengthens the soul. And he got me through that. And he built me up. And I tried to reconcile how we could have misunderstood what God was saying. And I truly believe that I didn't misunderstand God. That I read the story about Mary and Martha. They misunderstood Jesus. They both told him, if you were here, our brother would be alive. And Jesus had a plan for greater glory for God. And he said, Lazarus is going to be resurrected. And they didn't get it. They said, well, yeah, on the last day, he'll be resurrected. So they misunderstood God. And I think I misunderstood God, but I think there was a reason. God knew how close I was to Julie. Like we were soulmates for sure. And if I knew she was going to die, I'd be pleading and begging with God not to take her and to put me out of my misery. He allowed me to believe that she'd be healed. But I do believe that no word from God will ever fail. And this is just my theory, but I believe that he's given me and Julie 15 years of ministry. Right now, I've written a book. She's written half of a novel that I've completed now that I'm going to put out. And I use her songs at Bible studies quite often. So we do have a ministry. And even if I die, there are ministries that are going on. The pastor's dead, but his sermons are still being preached. So I believe that God's given us 15 years of ministry, regardless if Julie's here or even if I'm here. And because I believe that no word from God will ever fail. It may not have been the way I intended it to be. And I thank God now the way he did it, because I did not worry or grieve during those 8 months. I had the joy of the Lord. And Julie's already done her work. She's written 150 songs. She's written the novel and that. And so even though she's not here, we have a ministry. And I thank God for giving me this extra time, even on your program. I never go looking to promote myself or my book. I gave all my books away free. Rachel was the one that got this interview. I didn't go looking for it. And I believe that's how God's going to use me. He's the one that leads me, and I just obey him with it wherever he leads me. So I thank you, Tony, for giving me this opportunity to share God's goodness in my life, and it's available for everyone who wants it.
And how can they get a hold of the book? And like I say, I would say to people, get a copy of it. It's not a fat book, but, I'm like I say, I got it today. I started reading into it and couldn't put it down. So I had to stop because I had other things to do. But, I'll be getting back into it again tomorrow. I do recommend that people, get it. So how can they do that?
Well, the book's on Amazon. So if you go on Amazon and you type in If God Gave Me a Voice, Streeter and Tang, it'll come up on there.
Excellent. Yep. So I encourage people to do that. And I think I'm going to be having your son-in-law, Rachel's husband, Ralph, on in a few weeks' time as well. And of course, he is, makes Christian, or is part of making Christian movies. And the one Genesis Paradise Lost is one people have probably know about. So that's your son-in-law. And so I think this is excellent to have you on first, and then I'll have him as well. And I believe God ordained it, so that's very cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony.
And thank you too, George. And folks, I will put in the description links to the book and also to George and Julia's music. And don't forget, visit aminutemidnight.com, our website, and our shows are on YouTube, iTunes, and on our website. And all the music used in the A Minute to Midnight shows is written, played and recorded by me, and you can download free music on the A Minute to Midnight website if you want to, and donations can be gratefully accepted by us at the website as well. Well, that's about it for today's show. We'll be back in a few days' time with another one. God bless and have a great week.